or at least the majority of them. So yeah, that's really a big request that I have. Just 24 hours. It actually is not a big request. It's not much. But I don't want to open that can of worms again.
Yeah, the problem with things like that is that it can serialize changes that are easier to do if they actually stack on each other, and really should be the discretion of the editors whether we can fix a typo or something like that, or rearrange sections or changes like that, which really need to be done in a sequential way, or it gets in the way. So I'm not a big fan of shackling ourselves to some rule that really isn't necessary. On the other hand, I do respect that if we actually have a serious technical discussion, we need to use some time, and then even 24 hours maybe way too little.
Yeah, typos I don't mind so much. Section reordering I'm not sure about, but I don't know. If the concern is that we won't move very fast as as developing the spec, then in all honesty, we're not really moving very fast as it is. I doubt that 24 hours for an open PR is going to be all that much. And if you have multiple PRs that need to be stacked on each other, then you can put a depends on thing in the comment, and we'll know that the one PR depends on another one, and you can open them all at the same time, and they can all be reviewed at the same time.
Yeah, it just means that some rebasing required then, and you can end up with delta clashes and extra work. I mean, I would say that the pace might pick up as we do increasing sort of fine polishing of the document, just the wording, because that's going to be scattered all over the place, and it's not going to be particularly deep. So that's my concern. But I think for any substantive change, yeah, the 24-hour grace period is a good idea.
Yeah, I don't think it would be appropriate for us to make an official pronouncement on this subject, aside from we should ask our editors to exercise judgment in not rushing through anything that is actually substantive.
Are you comfortable with that, Greg?
I suppose. In JSON schema, we have a 2-week period, so and we're moving at I would say faster than what JSONPath has moved so far. So I don't know that the slowdown argument is that big of a deal.
Well, it depends a lot on how people work. So I'm not a full-time JSONPath person. So when I actually allocate a block of time to work on this stuff, I swap in context, and then I actually need to have a period of rapid progress, and then I swap out that context. So I mean, you are trying to force me into a work schedule that is not compatible with what I'm trying to achieve. So please have a little bit of lenience for the editors here. That it really makes sense for us to have bursts of intensive activity.
Shall we get started, folks, and get the boilerplate out of the way?
Yes, please.
Okay, so just to do the formalities, this is the JSONPath Working Group interim meeting for August 2022. As this is an official IETF meeting, the note well applies here. I don't need to run through all of this. I will note that our AD Francesca is now on leave, so you'll have to talk to the Ombudsman team. Just so I don't forget, note takers, are we just going to do it as we usually do, which is I try my best to scribe the bot asset once it appears on YouTube. Otherwise, if you want to help me out, that would be appreciated. Blue sheets are automatic because we're using Meet Echo. I'll try to keep a tab on the chat if anybody else joins or one of you need to be textual. I've put a couple of things on the agenda. I know that we've got a bit of an email thread going with some more detailed things on it. Is there anything else that we want to include in the agenda or any agenda bashing? No?
Oh, yes, please. I'd like to. Yeah, please. I'd like to include just a check-in on iRegExp.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Shall we? Do you want to do that now? And
yeah, if possible, let's do that first.
Okay.
So, if I can just speak to that, if I recall correctly, we agreed that we were ready to take that one forward to last call, but we need a document shepherd, which can't be me since I'm a co-author. And you didn't have time to do it, as I recall, James, or
no. I do have time to do it, and I've marked myself as document shepherd, but I have dropped the ball on it. But the working group last call can go out before the shepherd write-up, as I understand.
Right. Would anybody object to a working group last call on that at this point? Excellent.
Okay, so I guess the action there is for us to do the working group last call and for me to put some time in and actually do the document shepherd write-up.
And James, I'm perfectly happy to help with that. I mean, whereas I can't have my name on it, I'm happy to pitch in if it needs any work.
Yeah, there's separately, I know that there's been a lot of work done elsewhere in the IETF around the template for it, so I'll just read the documentation there and perhaps find some other write-ups to give me some inspiration for what should be in there and what it might look like. And I might fling a preemptive version of it out just to get some feedback, considering this is my first attempt at this. But okay.
Okay.
Cool.
Now, Karsten, you have some slides. Do your slides roughly line up with that issues list? Karsten?
Yeah, you always have to remember that there are two mutes with Meet Echo. I have some slides, but these are just on the issue of extension points.
Okay. In that case, I guess our first agenda item is equality and inequality of structures and structure types. So Glenn brought this forward, and I spoke up to it a bit. To my knowledge, nobody else has. So what do we have there?
No.
We have something from Stefan there.
Yeah, I mean,
we're talking about duplicate keys. Before we get to duplicate keys, I would like somebody other than Glenn to have an opinion about whether it's okay to go ahead and support inequality on arbitrarily complex structures and arrays. On balance, I am slightly against this, but not enough to scream and lie down on the road. So other people, please. Go ahead, Karsten.
Yeah, I'm in favor of putting this in, and the main reason I'm in favor of that is that if we don't put it in, it's really hard to fix later. And it will be a violation of the principle of least surprise for at least some people. And it doesn't seem like it's really complicating implementations. So we might as well do it.
Greg?
Yeah, I'm in favor of this as well. I think JSON equality is pretty well defined, even for structured values. Objects are equal if they share the same keys, and the values for those keys are the same between the two values. And then arrays have there's a term for it, I'm forgetting, but it's the same index values between two arrays are equal. Then the arrays are equal. The only question is that duplicate keys thing, which I would like to speak to once we get to that as well.
Stefan, do you have an opinion?
Yes. At the beginning, I was against equality of structured values, but I gradually changed my mind, and I think now it's really much more consistent with anything else. Equality is one thing. The other thing is comparing with smaller or greater than, but we can exclude this for now, and I'm in favor of this. Yes.
Karsten? Oh, let me just raise one issue I put myself on the queue for, which is if we do this, do we need to add literals so that I can do a literal equals against an object literal provided in the JSON path itself? That's just a non-rhetorical question. Okay, I'm done. Karsten?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The other thing is about doing inequalities, comparisons, less than and greater than. That the same issue applies here. That if we don't put it in, it will be hard to fix that data. And inequalities of arrays is pretty easy to define. So the question is whether that shouldn't be very easy to put in. And inequality of maps is indeed not so easy. And that's probably a place where people will not be surprised if we don't support that.
Glenn?
On literals, I would say it's not doesn't add a great deal of useful function if we added literals, but also it could be added later painlessly.
Would we need an extension point for that, or?
I don't think so. We just extend the syntax.
Okay.
Well, we even could do this using the extension point I'm proposing, but this will be a bit ugly.
Okay, in opposition, go ahead.
I think an extension point for greater than, less than is no good solution. From a mathematical point of view, you cannot easily member-wise order vectors, matrices, and so there might be no surprise from users if we cannot do this with arrays.
So
Okay.
just to be clear, Stefan, you're saying even with arrays, it would be okay to leave that out?
Arrays, you cannot order different arrays.
Right. Okay. So in opposition to this, probably my primary concern is this actually good practice? Would I actually want to do this in an application? Have especially since there's no literals, do some comparison of arbitrarily deep structure nesting in a stream of JSON coming in over the internet. If somebody did that in a code review and sent it to me, I'd probably say, you shouldn't do that.
To counterpoint that, .NET released their JSON model that I use in all of my libraries, and one of the huge outcries that the .NET world had was, why isn't there a JSON compare or a JSON equality included in this model? People want that nested equality, at least to have the ability to do it. So I think if we don't include this, then there will be complaining.
I just
Okay,
put in an example in the chat.
So go ahead. What's that, Karsten?
I just put in an example in the chat.
Yeah. Also, on my question, by the word inequality, do we mean the mathematical sense, which states, a comparison, a less than or a greater than, or do we mean not equal for the purpose of this PR?
Intended it to mean not equal.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm talking about less than and greater than.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the issue that spawned this PR, I listed a number of things which I made out of scope, and one of them was less than or greater than of structured types. So I kind of deemed that out of scope for this PR. But
I think also
on the agenda.
I think also you put out of scope for this particular PR the greater than and equals and less than and equals.
Yeah.
Because we can come back and address, or once we've defined what this is, then we can address those as well as a greater than or an equal. But we can define that separately.
Yeah.
So I would expect that we can use the definition of the bang equals operator as not equals operator, and that should always hold, and then we can simplify this discussion.
Yes.
By the way, those date comparisons, all dates should always be in RFC 3339 format. So wrong.
That'd be a string.
Can I just say something to Tim's point about deep structure comparisons being an anti-pattern, useless? I somewhat agree, but I think the surprise factor of if someone actually found a use for it and it didn't work, I think that tips the balance for me. That's why I wanted to do it.
For what it's like, I looked at C. Bergman's comparison, and it's all over the map. Some do, some don't. So it's not. I didn't actually count or anything like that, but this is certainly not wildly out of sync with what at least some implementations do. Okay, just to save time, I'm going to say that I smell rough consensus here, which is that yes, we should go ahead and do this, and that we should also support. So at least we have, I think where there's consensus, at the very least we would support inequality and inequality, as in not equals. I'm not sure if there's full agreement on supporting ordering for arrays. Is anybody who's really against that?
I don't like ordering for arrays, no. Well, as in one array is less than another array, that is bad. I don't think that is. I don't think that's a thing that's been defined.
Okay, it certainly hasn't been defined, but I think there's a straightforward definition to be had.
What is that definition?
It's just that the array, one array is less than another if it's a prefix of the other array in which all the elements of the prefix are pointwise less than or equal to the corresponding element in the longer array.
that would be analogous to string comparison.
Yeah.
An ordinal
Yes.
string comparison.
Yeah, precisely.
I could get behind that, but I've never seen that before.
Okay.
Well, it's standard JavaScript, so people who come from JavaScript or from other dynamic languages will expect that.
Okay,
Be
I'm
awkward to program, but
I'm detecting that, given a nice, clear explanation, which I don't think is in the draft currently, Glenn, that's right?
Correct.
People might go for this. So I suspect, Glenn, if you go ahead and write this up and do it nicely, it'll probably sail through.
Yeah, and if it doesn't go through, that's fine as well. I'll write it up and we'll see what happens.
yeah, I would like to see some level of analysis for where this might be in use, because as I mentioned, I've never seen this before.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't thought this carefully, but I'm thinking about, areas that have the things that aren't just integers and just numbers, non-comparable things at various positions in there. It smells kind of wormsy to me. So I'm
Yeah.
let's
Like,
go
how do
ahead
you
and
compare
generate
an array of strings against an array of integers?
Yeah, I'll certainly take that into account when I'm writing the PR. And if it turns into a can of worms, I won't even push the PR up.
Okay.
Okay.
Good enough. No, I think unless somebody has more to say on this subject, we should talk about duplicate keys. Karsten, you wanted to say you had a presentation on duplicate keys?
No, on extension points.
Oh, on extension points, right? Okay. So duplicate keys, I think we
don't
all
exist,
agree.
so I cannot make a presentation on that.
So I think on duplicate keys, we all agree that this is bad, and we're not going to specify in detail we're not going to try and be the what WG and specify in detail the exact semantics of all the possible error permutations. And we're going to do the moral equivalent of 8259, which says this is, the behavior is unpredictable. And there was a lot of argument about what the best way to say that was, which I got bored and stopped reading. Is somebody have a strong opinion?
I think it comes down to the fact that different languages, even within a language, different parsers have different behavior when it comes to duplicate keys because it's not specified. And if a JSON path implementation is using some external parser for reading the JSON, then it's dependent upon whatever the behavior that parser has decided to use. So I don't know that it's right to hold a JSON path implementation to a specific behavior when the parser it's depending upon has its own behavior.
So Glenn, you pasted a link to.
Yeah, I did a PR late yesterday to clear this up essentially, and I made it undefined behavior, but the behavior of a comparison is that the result has to be true or false, so it's implementation dependent. So I think I used the term implementation dependent. The details in lines 1180 to 1183 can actually be simplified with that precondition on 1179. But let's not get into that here. I'll follow up with the simplification. But basically, I've just said that if there are no duplicate names, keys, if you like, then we can define object equality. And then on line 1186, I said if there is an object and at least one of them, either or both have got duplicate names, then the result is implementation dependent, but must be true or false.
Is there a case for saying that essentially at a much higher level point in the spec?
Yes, please.
Because this whole issue of duplicate keys is not, strictly there for comparisons. It's at the basic semantic level of what you can expect JSON path to do on anything at all.
I think we can make the general statement about the behavior being implementation dependent at the high level, but we have to tie it down to sort of, not launching nuclear attacks and that kind of thing in the detail.
.NET's parser will throw an exception when it encounters a duplicate key. So I don't even know that I could get to the point where JSON path is executed if an object has duplicate keys. So maybe that means that this doesn't affect me. I don't know.
Yeah, I think it does.
Kirsten?
Yeah, so my point of view is that duplicate keys is an issue about JSON texts. It's not an issue about JSON values. The implementation defined thing we have is how does JSON decoder react to duplicate keys, and that of course is an issue that would have needed to be solved in JSON. It never was solved, so we have this ambiguity here. It's not at all clear to me that on the JSON value level we can still have duplicate keys. So Greg has one example in JavaScript, and many other implementations, just one of the keys is selected and the other ones are discarded. And I think we would have to search long and wide for implementations that actually carry duplicate keys from a JSON text to a JSON value. And I think we should simply exclude that from consideration for this document. Yeah, that's not something that's a problem in practice, because the problem is on the way from the JSON text to the JSON value. That is a real problem in practice, but that's not the one we see in JSON parser.
Where this actually arises in practice is when you're using a streaming tokenizer, which I've actually done a lot, because in high throughput event processing things, you don't want to take the time to parse everything into an object model. You want to use a tokenizer, and in that scenario, it is certainly the case that you can, your parser callbacks could be called back twice for the same member, for a member with the same key. And I think that's true in at least the popular mainstream parsers in multiple languages. So you can run into this actually. Yeah. What you're saying, Carson, is true in the case where you're using. I use Json a lot. So Json has a JSON next token API. And it also has an object mapper. Object, is that what it's called? I think API. And if you use the object mapper API, well, one of the keys vanishes. You only get one in the object model. That makes all sorts of sense. If you're using the next token API, yeah, you can see the same member twice.
Yeah, I've even seen parsers where, I forget which language it is, where it's non-deterministic which key you get. You only get one, but it's not deterministic which one you get, and you could run the program multiple times and get either key in those times.
We should let Glenn in here, but I think I disagree with you, Carmen, that you can count on this being taken care of and you'll never see it. Yeah, you could.
Yeah, okay. So
go ahead, Glenn.
A similar example occurred a few years ago where I made the assumption that any sane representation of Linux environment variables wouldn't have duplicate keys, and I was wrong. And so my point here is that it all depends on the representation that's chosen for the data structure. The representation of the object. The parser can do its stuff, but if there's a representation that allows duplicate keys, then all sorts of strange things can happen. But my second point is that if I was a tester and I was going to test JSON path, I would create a hostile implementation of JSON that did all sorts of strange things with duplicate keys, and I would push this spec to its limit. It won't happen in practice, I don't think. It's unlikely to happen in practice. But in terms of the robustness of the spec, I think we need to take it into account.
I would, whereas I disagree with Karsten that, this just, doesn't happen at the JSON value level. I would agree with him that I think this should probably, that this is really an issue at the JSON text level primarily, in terms of the right way to think about it. So I would probably disagree with you, Glenn, that this needs handling down at the detail level. I would think this would be best handled by a statement relatively high up saying, depending on how the mapping from JSON text to nodes in effect is done, the behavior in the presence of duplicate keys is unpredictable. And that applies to every statement in this spec that concerns behavior concerning a key that's extracted by a member that's specified by key value. And then just leave it at that.
So you wouldn't try the behavior down to true or false in comparison. You'd allow it to error or launch nuclear missiles, etc.
Sorry, your voice wasn't good there. Can you say that again?
I agree.
Go ahead. Go ahead, Stefan.
I agree. It's only a matter of the parsers, and so we really cannot do a lot here. Neither the implementations nor the spec writers. We are referencing at several places JSON. So my question is, why shouldn't we use or referencing or demanding the JSON compatibility here? So because JSON is explicitly excluding the same value, the same name.
So let me speak to that. So in principle, I agree with you, Stefan. Unfortunately, whereas IJSON is used quite a bit in specs, I have not observed it being available in parsers. I haven't seen really say, let's create a parser, put it in IJSON mode. So whereas that what you say is correct, I'm not sure it's that useful. Glenn?
Yeah, if we make a general statement about unpredictable behavior, are we comfortable with not tying down the behavior of comparison, equals equals, to giving true, false, or potentially error? Do we allow it to just do anything?
I think if we do a good job of writing that statement, we really shouldn't need to then go and, reiterate it at every point where a reference to a object member by key value appears in the spec.
Yeah, exactly. So things like $.a don't mean anything in a world where you can have duplicate keys. So we have to have a very, very general statement about this. And I agree with Tim that we should do this in such a way that simply takes away the consideration for all the detailed places. Of course, we still have to check those detailed places if what we wrote there actually meshes right with the general aspect of handling duplicate keys. And Tim, of course, you're right about streaming parsers. But again, a streaming parser is an implementation that is making some compromises, for instance, in being able to properly evaluate $.a. And it will have to have a compromise on comparison as well. So this is not a surprise.
Glenn?
Yeah, so I'm coming around to this idea of a general statement of unpredictable behavior, but just want to be absolutely clear. If we look at the text on the screen, we delete line 1186, so we wouldn't actually make any statement about what happens when there are duplicate keys. We just spec the case where there are no duplicate keys. Is that correct?
I think that's right, yes.
Okay.
There's also a problem with line 1186 because an implementation might internally fail
Yeah, sure.
if it is fed things that aren't even JSON.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, I think that we're heading towards a situation where we're going to have one statement about this somewhere relatively high up in the spec, and then we can argue about what exactly that says, what words it uses, as much as we want to, and then leave that to cover the rest of the spec. You good with that, Glenn?
Yeah, and the details of the spec will have to kind of allow for that general statement, if it were, not contradict that general statement.
Correct. Okay, I think we're done with this.
Yes.
Just one more thing, which is should less than or equal be equivalent to less than or equal, which Greg was talking about. That was one of the out of scope issues for this PR. I think that's relatively straightforward. I would say the answer is yes.
Well, it's pretty straightforward for me that the answer should be no, because A less than B must be the inverse of A greater than or equal B. And if you don't have that equivalence, then things become complicated. And I see that you want to have the other equivalence as well. And our fail false approach, unfortunately, doesn't provide us with an obvious answer here. But I think we need to acknowledge that conflict and just state that we decided in favor of one of the equivalences and against the other equivalence. That's probably the only thing we can do.
I don't think that there is the conflict. If you have A is less than B, and does logically imply B is greater than. A is less than B inverted is A is greater than or equal to B.
Not.
Not. Yeah, A is not greater than or equal to B. So that's greater than or equal, which is what we're saying.
Yeah.
I think we're saying the same thing, coming from the different direction.
Yeah, I think it's logically consistent too, actually. So, Carsten, can you talk us through that? Why there's a contradiction there?
Yeah, I forget the details, so I haven't completely swapped in JSON path after my vacation yet. But that's of course true for all reasonable comparisons. But the ones where we want to return false for failure, we have to be careful. And I seem to remember that there was a case that we actually couldn't get right. But I have to look at those examples
if we are retaining,
So,
that's
okay.
That's in the case where you have a type mismatch. In a type mismatch,
Right.
you haven't changed anything, right? In a type mismatch, it's just false, and that actually breaks the rule of if the word foo is tested to being less than 3, and that turns false, it does not mean that foo is greater than or equal to 3, right? Both sides of that are just false.
Yeah, so I think we're saying that the equivalence less than or equal is equivalent to less than or equal for type compatible values at the same time.
Correct.
Right.
Okay.
Even if they're type incompatible, less than or equal will still return false. Because the less than will return false, and then the equal will also return false.
Yeah, true.
Yes, but the greater than equal will also return false, so it's not the inverse of
Correct.
less than.
But in a type mismatch, the greater than equal will return false. They both return false.
Yes,
with a
that's
type
right.
mismatch.
And that is uncomfortable because you can have a comparison where less than is false and greater than or equal is also false, and that makes some people uncomfortable. It doesn't bother me.
It just means that you have to apply extra care when you are rearranging formulas, making use of comparisons. And
Right.
But I think that comes.
Go ahead.
I think that comes at the type mismatch level rather than at the greater than or equal level. So if we in the spec define greater than equal operator as greater than or equal, then the type mismatch thing still applies. It's still uncomfortable, but it's still logically sound. If that makes sense.
I think if we would only would solely talk about arrays containing numerical elements, then I would agree, Carsten, to apply lexical ordering here, but that isn't the real world. We can have arrays in arrays, and I would like to know what about comparing objects. It's I think we agree that comparing two different objects, there it's very hard to get some kind of ordering here. So what to do with objects and what to do then with arrays if some members or only a single member is a single element is an object also.
Yep.
Yeah, I think Glenn's going to be digging into all of that rat's nest with his
Right.
pending PR.
We will
Yeah, but
we'll
it's
see if Glenn can produce a PR that convinces us.
I'll take
No pressure.
I'll take another action. I've got an existing action to do a PR for ordered comparisons less than greater than of arrays. I'll take another action for this less than being equivalent to the inverse of greater than or equals. I think that might start to fall apart, but I'll have a go at it.
Yeah. Also, Glenn, when you do the PR for ordering on arrays, you do have to address the subject of what happens if there's a type mismatch or an object comparison that falls out of the middle of that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Are we done with this for now? In that case, we should give the floor to Karsten.
Maybe we can quickly just call consensus on what I seem to hear here, that we are not going to try to define the ordering on objects.
Correct.
Yeah.
I think I think we have consensus on that.
Good.
Okay.
Phew. Thank you.
Okay, Karsten, tell us about extension points.
Yeah, I only just returned from vacation and then went sick. So this is about the minimal presentation I can make about this subject. So we had a lot of discussions about extension points that were kind of on the implicit level without actually writing down things. And the one extension point that we have identified really is this functor extension point, where we had length as a long-standing example. So you can distinguish a 10-digit ISBN from a 13-digit ISBN or something like that. And we can generalize this to a functor with 0 more arguments, which are comma separated. So that would be the overall syntactic form of this extension point, and the specific name, the functor, length, current year, compare normalized, and so on, those would be registered extensions. And to make sure that the extension point mechanism is actually implemented, we would use length as an extension that actually comes with a JSON path, so people actually write the code to pass this. So I think that's essentially where we are at. Now the question is, where does this syntactic form go to? So where can that appear? And that turns out to be a little bit more complicated because we have pushed some of our typing system into the syntax. So having a common syntax for various things that might want to be addressed by extensions might bite us. I haven't generated actual examples where they bite us, but this seems pretty obvious when we think about the way how we separate Boolean expressions from comparables, from singular paths, and from a special case string literal, which is allowed in some places and not others. And I think we have to look at all these and see whether something weird happens. So if we have an extension that actually operates on paths, then of course you only really want to use it in the place of the production singular path. And if it occurs in a different place, it's not going to work right. So I think we have to discuss how the things that are still tractable, not easy, but tractable with the current syntax, change when we use the extension in different locations. And the inverse, of course, also holds. The extension can have arguments, and these could be Boolean expressions, these could be comparables, these could be singular paths, these could be string literals. And right now, it's not clear to me whether an extension actually has to say how its arguments are supposed to be interpreted, or what are valid arguments to give to this extension. So we have kind of the location problem on the top down, and we have the argument problem on the bottom up, and we have to make sure that we fit into the syntax with that. And that's why I didn't just throw out a proposal, because every proposal I came up with immediately ran into complexities here. So there are many ways of solving that. We could have sigils or something like that. I'm not going into that. But I think we really should be coming up with a number of examples where we want this to work right. And then, and of course, examples that are supported by people actually doing something in existing JSON path and JSON path-like implementations. And then work from there and look at the syntactical issues and look at the potential semantic impact of having to distinguish a singular path from a comparable, for instance.
I think it's a good way to go to start with a single and take the length extension points and show what it leads us to.
Greg?
I think this is great. One thing I would add is order of execution. So in C#, if you look at the compare normalized, in C#, what that would do is it would evaluate the at first name, and then it would have tried to evaluate the string constants. But if you didn't have a string constant and there's something evaluatable, it would do that. So basically, it evaluates all the arguments in order, and then it passes those into the function. It passes the results of those into the function. Do we want to do that, or do we want to say the at first name is a path that gets passed into the compare normalized function? And I don't know, I'm not saying that we have to have an answer right now, but I think at some point we do need to have an answer for that.
Yeah, first of all, don't think we have out of execution issues here, because this is all strictly functional. So there are no side effects that we're doing one thing first and then the other thing later. would influence us. So whether you evaluate Jörg first or @first name should not have an influence on the result. But we do have typing system issues, and you of course picked exactly the one thing that bothers me here, which is that @first name really is just a path, and the extraction of the JSON value that is at this path, is that something we do implicitly by defining compare normalized in such a way that its first argument needs to be a comparable, and we know how to turn singular paths into comparables, or is this something that actually at the point of application of this extension you would have to write? So you would actually have syntax for saying @first name here really is meant as the JSON value there, and not just the path. So that's a decision we have to make at some point, and we have to see whether such a decision can be reasonably made by an extension, and how difficult it gets to actually implement all this when extensions suddenly have these interesting additional properties in terms of interacting with the typing system.
I think that's roughly what I said. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a really good step forward, Carson. So thank you for this. Just a query about the terminology. It's a minor point, but why do you say functor and not function?
Because I don't want to restrict this to functions. You see the current year? This is most definitely not a function because next year it's going to have a different value.
Okay, in terms of a mathematical function.
Yeah.
With no side effects.
We don't have to call it functor. That's just the name that came to mind.
Functor in my mind is overloaded with loads of categories stuff, and it's a bit scary.
Yeah, I think given that we're in a computer programming space, I would take the computer programming definition of a function, in which current year would actually, to me, fit the bill. But it's splitting hairs, and I don't really care.
Yeah, let's just take note that we have to find a better name for this thing that is called functor on this slide.
One question: are there already other specs that are successfully using these extension points that we can learn from?
I think programming languages in general.
No. Other specs. Is this completely new? Is JSONPath the first spec which intends to use extension points, or is there already some practice which we can learn from?
There are lots of specs that use extension points, but this specific syntax here came to mind quickly because it's a pretty common way of doing extension points. So I would have to dig in RFCs, which RFCs actually use an extension point syntax like this. So the ones I have recently written use different syntaxes, but these are not syntaxes we would want to copy here. But the function argument notation is so familiar, and we already have examples like length and wasn't there a size? I don't remember. So we had several examples already that took this syntactic form, and adopting this syntactic form as the syntactic form for the extension point we want to have in JSONPath seems to work very well.
I think the other example we had might have been index of at. It was a bit of a weird one.
Yeah, because that doesn't really work in this context.
Yeah.
I think another argument for using this syntax is that there are implementations that are doing something similar, plus JSONPath does something similar. So I think that's another argument for this syntax.
The type system a little bit. I mean, JSON has a type system of a sort. It's well understood, but it's complicated because you look at that length function, and you say, well, if you're going to write the definition of the length function, it's perfectly reasonable to apply it to a string, to an array. It's even reasonable to apply it to an object. You know, how many members does this object have? Like on lots of programming languages allow you to apply the equivalent of length to a hash map, you know, or whatever it's called. But it's not reasonable to apply it to a number. So I don't think it's reasonable to apply it to a number.
Actually, there are languages where you can ask for the length of a number, and you get the minimum number of bits you need to represent that number in binary.
That's very nice.
What about a Boolean?
Yeah. So but the point I'm making is that to write, if I were going to write the definition of length, I would feel the need to say, you know, when applied to a string, it means this. When applied to an array, it means that. When applied to an object, it means this other thing. When applied to a number, what happens? It has no meaning. It throws an exception. So, you know, I think that in the year 2022, we can't be sloppy about types. Okay, we have to be. We have to be consistently and sanely typed in the behavior, and I'm worried that that's going to be quite difficult.
In that specific example,
abstractions. Are you going to have to make a bunch of abstractions, like to define length properly? Are you going to have a new abstraction of sort of thing which has a length, you know, or?
Well, it's all localized in length. The first thing you would need to define is what happens if there is no ISBN member in the current item. So that's a problem that every functor that can take a path as a parameter, as an argument, will need to solve. And we could also go the other way and say we have a length for strings and a size for arrays and something else for objects. So we don't need to make this generic. We could define very specific ones, which would make it easier for people to actually catch problems where an array occurs and length still returns something useful, so you match on the wrong thing. But that's the design of the specific extension point. And what I'm trying to do right now is designing the whole concept. And of course, looking at examples is useful, but we don't have to solve that problem right now.
Well, we do have to, if we're going to define this thing, we are going to have to write language about the way it interacts with types, and also, as you point out, with like arguments that just don't work, right? You know, that aren't there. So I'm just saying, let's not underestimate the necessity for being careful and thinking about this. Glenn, please go ahead.
I'm just wondering if we could get away with a set of restrictions on these functors that says that the arguments must be type, a JSON type, or absent. You know, like in @.isbn, it's either the result is either JSON type or absent. And if we made the result of a functor always the same kind of type, you know, JSON type or absent, then we might be able to you know, say that every functor definition has got to cope with those half a dozen cases.
Greg?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. I was going to say that, you know, the JSON path specification, when we're defining what a functor is, we say that the arguments can be of these types, these JSON types, or some internal representation of absent. And then it's the responsibility of the functor to handle any of those possibilities. And then where we specify length, because we have to do that because we're going to include it, it's not, we show an example of how to do that. Basically, what you were saying earlier, Tim, of if it's a string, do this. If it's an array, do this. If it's an object, do this. Otherwise, return X value for length that could be -1, because it's a nonsensical length.
It could be
but
return absent.
Right, it could return absent. But that would be the responsibility of the function, basically the function mini spec, to define.
I mean, in effect, what we're going to have to do, I think, is for the spec to contain language that constrains the future definers of functions, such that they don't define something that is nonsensical in terms of the JSON type system. I don't think writing that would be much fun. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying that we are stepping onto some shaky territory here.
Well, I think we need to make a decision, and then it will be trivial.
What decision is that?
Yeah, for instance, what just was proposed only allow JSON values or absent as arguments and return values. And then it suddenly becomes very, very simple.
But then
I need to ask here, what exactly is absent as a return value, absent as an argument? Absent means is not found, is undefined. But undefined
Correct.
is no valid type. So what is absent as a return value?
It just means that the whole construct was based on something that isn't there. So it should be treated in the same way we treat things in other places that aren't there. So wherever we have a singular path and use that in place of a comparable, we have to deal with absent. So we already have that.
I understand this. Length would be a functor that is supposed to return as a result numerical value. So if I want to know the length of 2, what will it return? Absent is not a valid type, so we need to return false.
No, we should return absent because 2 doesn't have a length.
Correct. So with our current expression syntax, the way that it works is if you have a path that results in an absent value, that absent just falls through and the entire expression returns false. Same thing would happen here. If you do the length of 2, it would return absent and the entire expression would just return false.
Okay.
That works if functions can only appear where paths would, right?
Well, paths can already appear where comparables can. So we essentially have the problem through the entire expression language, with the possible exception of the right-hand side of regex, which is limited to string literal. And I would probably want to open that up.
Taking what you said there, I wonder if it make any kind of sense to say that an extension point is a kind of path.
Yeah, that was what I wanted to enable here. So this is the alternate approach to saying we can only have JSON values there. But yeah, now you have all the complexity in the definition of each single extension, how to handle these different cases. I think it's not a big complexity, but we certainly should make sure that in the length example, we handle this in such a way that implementers of other extensions will know what to do there.
So,
Okay, I
what kind of,
would like to experiment with this and try to start with the length functor, and I'm curious where we get to. I like this approach.
Yeah, so we have a issue. I forget the number of that. And maybe we can agree to put some examples we find in other JSON paths-like query languages or in existing JSON path implementations about something that would fit into this space. So we have a number of examples to look at and can make reasonable decisions based on that knowledge base. So that would be my next step here.
yeah, I was going to say, okay, what is the next step? The next step is to, Kirsten, would it make sense as the next step to actually write in great detail the specification of length and handle all the places where that might ripple around the rest of the spec?
Makes sense to me. I still want those other examples. So
Yeah.
we could do the definition of length at the same time.
Because my intuition is that if we do a really good job of that, because obviously it's going to be used in places where comparisons are expected, right? Otherwise, why would you be doing it? So it's going to force us to say what happens in various failure modes in those comparisons. Maybe that's already covered by the language, I'm not sure. Like, you know, if, for example, if I say length on a path that's broken, then any comparison that shows up and returns false, I guess, because it's a type mismatch or something like that. But we need to write all that down. And my intuition is that if we do a good job on that with length, because it has a parameter, and, you know, and has a result that would be expected to be used, that there'd be some hope that that would, you'd have to solve the larger problem to do a good job of doing that. Okay, Glenn?
You could also use length as an index.
Yeah, we would need to add and subtract to make this really useful. But we can define plus and minus as extension functions. So maybe I should just assume that we have plus and minus as extension functions, just to make sure we play with these length as index examples.
Mhm.
I mean,
I think for now, I think
Sorry.
for now we leave length out as an index. We come back to, I think that can be added after we've got the extension in there.
Somebody said index is not a good example for an extension point because the single argument index would get is the during iteration. There any other parameter would or argument would make no sense. So we need to discuss index not in this context of extension points.
Yeah, to do a real index, you would have two parameters. One, excuse me, one is the object or array the item in which you are searching. And the other one is a filter expression that tells you whether you have had a hit. And that, of course, requires functions as arguments, which is a lot of fun.
Which then goes back to my original opening thing about evaluation order. One thing that I did want to ask, Carson, did you put in any consideration for having one of these functors in place of a Boolean expression, for example, in place of an A is less than B, so that you can combine them with ands? So like, if I wanted to check that ISBN existed, so I'd do an at ISBN and is empty at.a. So I wanted to make sure that ISBN existed and an A key existed with an empty string for some fictional is empty extension.
So the answer is yes, it's on the slide. Of course, we could emulate this by restricting input and output of extensions to JSON values, because we do have true and false there. So that's not a type system problem. That's more of a problem with the way the syntax works. So I hope this can be solved, but we would have to look at that.
Okay. Would it be beneficial to not include that first as a first go?
Well, these are two different proposals. Limiting to JSON values and having the whole gamut of types that we have in JSON path. These are, to me, these are two different proposals, and they should be evaluated against each other.
Yeah, I think the reason I bring it up is because we've already declared that a false literal in an expression is different than the A is less than B result of false.
Yes.
So I think that I think it brings in some gray area in that decision.
You cannot leave it gray. You have to define it.
Right.
So we would have to define what allows us to put in a function in a position where a Boolean expression, or actually a parent expression, is expected in the syntax.
Yes.
Okay, Glenn?
Just wanted to say I'm fairly uncomfortable with all this in terms of the benefit compared to the cost. But I think this is the right direction to go in terms of exploring the options. But I wanted to ask, are we limiting extension points at this stage to being in filter expressions?
I don't think we have an example of using them anywhere else. Oh, in indexes, you mean? Yeah, sure.
Well, yeah, for example. But, you know, I'm very happy if we scope it down to say inside filter expressions, get a handle on that first, and then consider expanding it later, just as an approach.
Well, what do you mean by later?
I have seen people try to do a dot length at the end of a JSON path in order to try to get the length of the array returned. I don't know if that's what you're talking about, Glenn.
No, it's just a general statement, but that's a good example.
Okay.
I think that you know, that might be advantageous. If we limited the extension point to be applied in filter expressions, then I think that simplifies the task of dealing with errors and, you know, absent arguments and things like that, because it, you know, the filter then just simply does not return anything, right? Or
yeah.
I tend to agree to Tim to restrict it to filter expressions at first, yes.
Yeah, I agree with that, except if we find out it's just so cheap to allowed in other places that we can just do it.
Yeah, it was just a suggestion about the tactics that we adopt. Let's look at filter expressions first, and if we get a nice clear spec for that, then we can look about extending it. If doing filter expressions torpedoes the whole thing, then we don't need to worry about the rest.
So putting my co-chair hat on here, if there's some what's the word I'm looking for? Dividing line in terms of complexity. If it becomes apparent that getting this right is going to require 14 more months of discussions, at that point, I would be inclined to hold that that's a demonstration that the cost benefit of this work is not favorable, and we might have to live without it. So, yeah, I think the way is clear to taking the next steps, which I think is focusing on length to make sure we understand at least that, and probably restricting ourselves to filter expressions. But there's a limit to how much we should invest in this. That's all.
Yeah, I think I'd be happy if if we released and then this showed up in, say, a V2 of JSONPath.
Yeah, we just have to make sure that we don't put roadblocks in the way of doing that.
So, Karsten, are you going to take the next step here? And
well, I certainly will do the length thing.
Okay.
I would ask everyone to supply examples. So when you find anything in your daily work that could look like an extension, the exercise of an extension point in JSONPath, please submit that as a comment to the extension point issue. What's the number of
For
that?
now, are we considering only singular paths inside or as arguments?
No.
Like
Yes,
we only allow singular paths in expressions. Would that extend to functor arguments as well?
likely, but if you find an example for in a related language that is not bound by that, that would be an interesting example. So please don't restrict your searching for that.
Okay. I think I might be able to devise a few use cases for having a multiple path as an argument.
Okay. Okay, so I think we have made some progress in understanding the complexity of the issue, and I think the idea of limiting this to filter expressions has merit and is worth serious consideration. And I think so I think the next step here is for Karsten to convince us all that this can be done, at least in an example, by doing the length function. Right up. Is that a fair statement of where we stand?
Sounds good to me.
Fair enough.
Yes.
I don't see other agenda items, but I do note we have a couple of open issues. Should we turn our attention to those at this point? Greg?
One more thing on this extension method thing. At some point, we will need also to define how other people define extensions, and then what that interoperability looks like. Because if you have a JSONPath implementation and you define an extension for it, and I get one of the JSON paths that was written for your implementation, I might not know what that extension is. So we need to take that into consideration at some future point. We've got enough to do. I'm just bringing it up.
Yeah, that is pretty much standard fare in this space, because if you make something extensible, you have to live with interoperability between components that have the extension and components that don't have the extension. And there are a number of things you have to get right. And the most important one is not to create false interoperability, which is where one implementation thinks it can act on the extension, but doesn't have everything it needs
Yeah.
to do that.
Yeah, we're dealing with that in JSON schema right now.
Are people okay with looking at a couple of other issues? We have time left.
Yep.
Okay, so let's sort of do them in the reverse order. We have number 195, which is for existing expressions, does it really need to be a singular path? And let me see, did this discussion converge? I mean, just on the face of it, it strikes me that there's not a real big benefit of having a singular path, and so I think the answer is possibly no. Glenn, Karsten, did you guys come to a convergence on this?
Well, I just noticed it as something that looks odd. If you look for something, and you have to make sure that you cannot find two before you find out whether there is one at all. That's weird to me. But I didn't make a specific proposal what needs to be changed to allow that.
Yeah, my concern with this is, do we mean existence of a suppose we've got a path that delivers two values or one value. Okay, yeah, so I see. Yeah, sorry, I'm talking nonsense. So I'll shut up.
I mean, it seems to me that if I say exists and give it a path and what comes back isn't empty, yes, it exists. Okay, I mean.
Yeah, seems reasonable actually.
I haven't actually looked at the comparison page about how other things do this, but this restriction does really feel very artificial here.
It is very nice, though, that only singular paths are used in expressions, just in general. It's convenient for us. It may not be convenient for a path author.
So we're really just talking about extending the syntax a bit, aren't we? So that we allow non-singular path, general paths for existence.
Does that screw up the grammar for the rest of? I mean, is this going to be awkward?
Do we have general paths that start with the @ symbol? I don't think we do.
We do not know.
Well, @star.
I don't think we have that. Because that would return multiple values.
Yeah, but that's the point, isn't it? If we allow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, even descendant can return multiple values, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And I think it's perfectly reasonable. Does a particular descendant exist? And if it exists in 5 places, I mean, I don't want it to be false because there's more than one.
Yeah, so the observation here is that we currently don't have a way to do relative paths at sign-based paths that are not singular.
Mm-hmm.
It would be a little bit more of a grammar surgery than I expected.
It might be worth making a note on that PR, just to say that this would require us to put a full path grammar for the local item at symbol.
So why? Why does this require introducing that?
Because we don't have it yet.
Because the syntax at the moment just doesn't cut it.
It would mean there's an asymmetry between dollar and at in terms of what you have to do.
Okay, right.
I've got a general concern about this. That I wouldn't want this, if we do this, I wouldn't want multiple paths to creep into the rest of the expression language, for instance, in comparisons. Because
Right.
I've been there and it's pretty awful.
Yeah, let's not do that.
I think what you're saying is, if we did this, then the rules for exist expression would be different than for other kinds of expressions. And is that okay, or is that just too awkward?
I think that was Greg's point, wasn't it?
Yeah. I do not have a strong opinion on this. If it requires major spec surgery, you could easily make an argument that is not a good investment of time. But it does seem a little bit counterintuitive as it currently stands.
Yeah, I think it would be a very local change to the exist expression production.
Yeah, I don't mind
So
having
if
this
you were to
fractions and have a go at it.
so
Okay,
if
so
you
let's
were to
take an
do
action. Go ahead, Greg.
if you were to do an at.star inside a filter expression as an exists, that would filter out anything that isn't, that would filter out any item that is an array or an object. So you would get arrays and objects back, and if you have arrays and objects, that results in an empty or a non-empty set.
Yeah, non-empty arrays and objects, yes.
Right.
Okay, so I think the action item is Glenn is going to try and see if this can be done without grievous ugliness in the spec.
Yep.
Okay. What else do we have here in our issues? Okay, so we have selector classes don't feel right. See, from Greg.
Let me pull that up.
This is number, pardon me, this is number 201.
Yeah. So the way things are specified, the way the grammar is specified just doesn't line up with, at least with how I've implemented it, and at least one person has agreed with me. But it seems like the sentiment that I got back was that it doesn't have to. My feeling is that if we were to say that if we look at the list selector, it's basically just a comma delimited collection of the other things. So if we say that the list selector is the only thing, you got the square brackets and then a list of the other things in between it, and if you only have one, then that's just the other things. And I think we could collapse things a little bit better in the grammar. and it would actually align with how at least how I've implemented it, because I don't have a separate list selector. I just have, okay, I've got a bracket. I expect a list of indices, and an index can be what we explicitly call an index, which is a number. It can be a slice or a range. It can be a filter expression, a name. It can be any of those things that exists inside the brackets, comma delimited, but I don't explicitly have a list selector per se. Does that really make sense at all?
So this is essentially an editorial comment on how we name things.
I think so, but it may impact how other people implement the spec, and I don't know.
Worm? Yeah, I mean, just responding to that last point, it could affect the way people implement the spec. But my concern was that I think the spec should be geared so that it's readable by users as well as implementers. And in fact, I would expect the number of readers to far outnumber the number of users.
I disagree with that. Having lots of spec experience in JSON schema, I can guarantee that the vast number of users do not read the spec. They read blog posts, they read other people's, like you have some people, a small set of people who implement the spec. You have another small set of people who read the spec and then go write blog posts about what they think the spec says. And then the vast majority of people read those blog posts. Or they don't read anything at all and try to figure it out for themselves and then go post on Stack Overflow when they don't get it right.
Well, yeah, but my involvement in this came about because a few of us in our team wanted to use JSONPath and couldn't find a spec.
Yeah, I think we have to be realistic on what percentage of developers want to read the spec. But we also have to accept the fact that those people who actually explain things on Stack Overflow actually do need a spec to work from. So we have a priest class here that kind of mediates the connection to God. And the specification has to be good for that priest class. And I still think the priest class is larger than the implementer class.
Okay, that's fair, but I still don't think that the way that the grammar is specified is ideal for the reader, whether it's implementer or not.
Greg, have you proposed a concrete alternative here? I am looking.
It is in there. It's not. It's in the first comment where I've posted the alternative, but I mean, I could probably rework the A and BF a little bit better, A, B, and F a little bit better.
Would it be fair to say,
Greg, more
completely? I mean, would it be fair to say that you'd prefer a grammar in which there was less duplication, essentially?
Yes.
Yeah. You see, I think duplication is actually helpful for readers who want to examine a particular selector because they've got fewer levels of selector to go through, fewer levels of documentation to go through. You know, for example, list, they can just go there and see that it's a list, and then they can then refer to one of the other selectors and they're done, rather than having.
But what is it a list of? That's the question. The other selectors are just singular instances of whatever the thing inside the list is.
I think the problem we're running into here is that we need a second term. And you are trying to redefine selector to be the second term. And then we are in lack of the term for what is called a selector right now. And I actually would be happy if we could find a term for that. We briefly had index for that. There may be other ways to call this thing, but really we should come up with a term for the thing that goes into the comma separated list within the brackets first, and then it suddenly will all be very easy.
Okay. I'll see what I can.
Okay,
predict.
I think I'm going to say that that this does not actually affect the meaning of what we're trying to say, and is thus primarily an editorial issue. And
It is.
anybody who wants to propose a better wording or expression should propose it concretely as a PR, and then we'll see if we're if it convinces us.
Yeah, I can take that.
Okay, good. Karsten, you're still on the queue. Do you want to say some more?
No, I just wanted to say what I already said.
Okay. Okay, let's move on to another issue then. Extension point, branding. I'm not going to talk about branding here. Oh, right. And the last one is Glenn's issue about the list form of the dependent selector, which I can summarize as saying that our current draft departs from the consensus.
Which issue is that?
It's
232.
issue number 232. It's yours, Glenn.
Yeah, but a question of remembering it.
I mean, I think our charter is pretty clear that whether we like it or not, if there's a consensus among the implementations, that's what we should do, right?
Is there?
That's what Glenn says, but according to the comparison project.
I think it was later argued, though, that the consensus didn't exist because something about how that report is generated.
Yeah, that's right.
All
Some
right.
footnotes in the comparison site that I wasn't aware of. My paging mechanism isn't working very well on this issue. I don't remember much about it, so I'd have to go and read it again.
Yeah, I agree that it needs to be that the descendant selector ordering needs to be specified. I think we do specify it though. I need to go find that. To where I think we do specify it as you select the item, you select its children, and then you select the next item and its children, etc. I believe that's already in the spec.
Yeah, it's coming back to me now. I think the comparison site sorts the results to get a kind of better handle on a consensus, but the sorted values are actually not what the implementations are giving back. So I think some of the main implementations in terms of the behavior.
As far as I had understand this issue, part of the problem here was that you have two iterators. One iterator is iterating over the list selector, and the other iterator is iterating over the descendants in. And so if you swap what the outer iterator is and the inner, you get different result lists. And I'm not sure if we could explicitly define it. Maybe it's in one sentence we should mention it, how it should work to get always reliably the same results.
Yeah, I think the two orderings can be described as a recursive ordering, which is what I described earlier, or what I'm going to call a queuing order, where you queue all the first level results, and as you visit each item, you then queue its children. That way, you get the first layer of results, then you get the second layer of results, the third layer, etc.
Is this depth versus breadth first search?
Yes.
Or is it something
Sounds
different?
like yes.
Okay, I now remember pull request 233, which addresses this issue, or attempts to address this issue. And I think the only objection to that came from Tim on a kind of technicality in one of the side points, really. So a way forward would be to have a bit more of an extensive review of this PR, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Oh, I did not connect to the issue and the PR in my mind.
Yeah. At the bottom of the issue is the link to the PR. That's what saved the day.
Oh, and I'm up for a review there. Sorry. Yeah, so the action point is for the people who are listed as reviewers to review the pull request.
Yeah.
Dang it.
I mean, Tim, I don't know whether you want to discuss that detailed point, your comment, major changes.
Comment was about, but wait a second. The thing I objected to does not seem to be related to the ordering of the output. Does it? Am I missing something?
It's not. I mean, really, I should have kept that to a separate PR, but I just noticed it on the way through, so I put that in. It's just a simplification because we preserve duplicates, so we don't need to make that.
Okay, I get it. I withdraw my issue. That's my objection. That's fine.
Okay, thank you.
But I now that I didn't actually look at the wording change on thinking about the order of results in my head, so I'll go back and have another look.
Perfect.
Okay, so our action item there is to look at PR 233 and see if we are happy with that in the context of this issue. Okay, so, oops, where am I? Okay, going back to issues. So that, as far as I can tell, more or less kills all the issues, modulo some incoming PRs, with the only remaining substantial thing being the extension point proposal, which we are going to see.
So what is our scheduling from here on?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think it depends a lot, frankly, on extension points. I'm worried that that's going to lead to a very long delay, but it's impossible to say without looking at it.
So what time box do we give ourselves for that?
So it's now August. How's your schedule, Karsten? When can we expect to see?
Well,
that?
term starts in mid-October, so I'm in a position to get some work done.
Good. Okay, so I mean, if we can do that, in the next month, before in the next few weeks, then we could potentially do a working group last call this year, right?
Yes.
I would like to do that. I would like to do a working group last call this year. I think we've worked on this for a long time.
I actually would like to do it so that we can close the working group last call at IETF 115.
When's that?
November.
That would be great. Okay, let's
That
note
probably
that
means-
our, go ahead.
That probably means we need at least one more interim.
Yes. Shall we put something in late September?
It works for me. I can't do week 38, but everything else works for me.
Which week is that?
That
September
would be the
19th,
last week, starting the
23.
19th of September.
Okay, James, why don't you go ahead and do a doodle?
For week 39, is that
Works for me.
week 39 cast, and the week starting at September 26th?
Yeah, that
Sounds
works
good.
for me.
Yeah, I'll put in a doodle poll for that week unless folks have better suggestions.
Just to be clear, I think we've been doing these at this time, maybe to get around my schedule. Now that I'm doing this kind of thing full time, my schedule has really opened up. So we may be able to do these things a few hours earlier if it suits people like Tim, who are up at what, 3 in the morning now?
Well,
Something like that.
no, it's not you, Greg. It's the fact that aside from you and me, everybody else on this who's contributing is in Europe, and so we've been
Right.
doing this at a time convenient to Europe. I may have dark feelings in my head, but it actually makes practical sense to do that, and I can handle it, once every 6 weeks.
Okay. Yeah. My main concern is it doesn't interfere with me taking the kids to school or picking them up. That's
So
my
this is
big
a good
schedule
time.
right now.
So
Yeah.
this is an okay time for you then.
Oh yeah.
10 a.m. Europe works much better for me than 11 a.m. because that infringes on lunchtime, and never do that to a Central European.
Good to get your priorities right, isn't it?
Yes. Okay.
Okay. I think we are done for now then.
Yep.
Yeah, very good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. I have
Thank
written
you.
notes into the hedgehog. So, of course, these are not official notes, but if you need some reminders for what we discussed, of course, I was also discussing, so the notes may not be complete. On the other hand, this is a hedgehog, so if you see something wrong with those notes and want to fix it, that could also help.
So
Cool.
where are those notes, did you say?
I just put it in the chat.
Oh, right. Better grab that before I delete the window.
Thank you, Carsten.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Good night.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good lunch.